We are Life Church Livonia.
Good morning, Life Church. Well, good morning. My name is Brian. I am the pastor here, and we are so glad that you chose to run into the snow just long enough to get here to church today. It is a winter wonderland out there, and I don't know, I'm the guy who longs for snow if it's going to be winter. If it's going to be cold, it might as well be beautiful, right? And so I love this, and so I'm sorry if my prayers for snow caused you to want to run to the south. It's my fault. I take full responsibility. So hopefully we have you here in a space where you can grab some coffee, grab a donut, hang out with people that you know or are growing to know, and it will create a warmth that makes you realize this is why I get out of bed, to come and be with people who love me, who see me, and to experience a God who loves you more than any of those people ever could muster up on their own. And so we are in the midst of a series right now that is all about asking the question, what would it look like if instead of coming up with all of our own New Year's resolutions, we simply ask God to make our resolutions for us? What would that look like in your life personally? And what would that look like in our life corporately together as a church if we were to begin to follow a path that led us towards God's best for us in 2020? If you were to do that right now, if you were to stop and pause and begin to reorient yourself around a different type of resolution, how would your plans change? Would they need to change? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you've already stepped onto the path that God designed for you, but other times we are a mile down the wrong direction. And so there's two things we've asked you to pray as we start this series. And the first prayer is this: God, show me the true me that only you can see. Show me the true me that only you can see. This is the person that God is calling you to be, the person God is leading you to become. God, show me the true me that only you can see. And then the next prayer is this: God, show me the path towards becoming that person. Show me a way forward from where I'm at now to where I could be, where I should be. And this isn't about God giving you a picture of the idealized version of yourself that then causes you to feel a bunch of shame. It's God giving you a picture of the way he sees you. His beloved son, his beloved daughter. The way God sees you and the very best that is in you, and he's coaxing it out. He's drawing it out. And last week we talked about how we choose that path towards becoming the person God made us to be. And that part of that choice is choosing the life of a disciple. It's choosing to step into a process of discipleship that leads us closer to Jesus and into a deeper understanding of who God is. And in that space, we acknowledge that really what discipleship is that it's transformation that begins with a touch from Jesus. It begins with an experience with Jesus, but your life with Christ will never flourish if all that happens is you simply have one touch, one moment, one prayer. Your life with Christ will never flourish until you come to fully understand who Jesus is and you begin to yearn for him to change you and to reveal the life in him that is hidden from you at this point in your life. And it's a journey that begins to answer the question that Jesus asked his disciples. We looked last week at Mark chapter 8, and Jesus is with his disciples, and no one up to that point knew who he really was, and they're walking down the path, and he says, "Who do people say I am?" And they give him all these answers about the rumors about his identity. And then in that moment, as they're walking down the path, he turns to them in Mark 8:29, and he says, "But what about you?" "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" "What about you? Who do you say I am?" And Peter answered, he said, "You are the Messiah." You are the Messiah. The first non-demonic entity who actually declared who Jesus was. And Peter's answer was an aha moment. It was a light bulb moment, I think, for him and honestly for some of the other disciples that were around him as well. And that moment, that truth that he declared about Jesus would define his life for the rest of his life. And I long for each of you to have a moment like that, where God reveals himself to you in such a way that if Jesus were to come to you and ask you the same question, who do you say I am, that you would be able to answer the question because you've discovered it for yourself. Not discovered it because someone told you or revealed it to you, and not an answer that's given because your parents taught you or your grandparents taught you or your pastor even taught you, but something that you've actually leaned into the arms of God in such a way that it's a no-brainer for you to say, yeah, I know that guy. I know who Jesus is. Because I spend time with him. I've met him. But just because I long for you to have your own aha moment, just because I long for you to have your own personal experience of God, doesn't mean that I want you to do life on your own. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to step out of community and study and pray and study and pray and be all by yourself forever. It doesn't mean you're supposed to step out of community and stay there until you figured it all out. And once you figured it all out, you get to step back in. Because as we invite you into this process of discipleship, we realize that the process of discipleship happens most effectively within the context of community. The process of discipleship happens most effectively within the context of community because we were designed by God to be better together. Designed by God to be better together. And honestly, as I pray for the church and I think about what would it look like, God, for us to orient ourselves around you this year, to make our resolutions based upon your plans for us, this would be the next one that I would make for our church. And the resolution would sound something like this, that we would make the choice to lean into community rather than doing life alone. That we would make the choice to lean into community rather than doing life alone. In 3 of the 4 gospel accounts about Jesus, there's 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're the story of Jesus and his life and his ministry. And in 3 of the 4 gospel accounts, there is a story that shows up that Jesus tells. And some of us know that as a story. It's called the parable of the sower. And it's one of his most famous stories that he told. And a parable is simply a story with intent. It's a story with meaning. It's a story that had a specific purpose, a specific truth that he wanted to communicate to his audience. And in this particular story, it's about a farmer that goes out and he throws seed. And as Jesus tells the story, some of the seed, it falls onto fertile ground and it grows up and it flourishes as a plant and it produces a crop that's abundant. Another seed, it doesn't ever flourish. It grows up a little bit, but it doesn't grow up strong, and it dies prematurely, and it never produces fruit. And still other seed gets cast into spaces where it never even takes root. It never grows at all. And ultimately, the story is about the way people respond to the message of the good news of Jesus. Sometimes there's people that have their aha moment, and then they start to grow, but they don't flourish. They wither out and they die prematurely. There's other people that they have an opportunity for an aha moment. All of the ingredients are there for them to discover who Jesus is, but it falls on deaf ears and they miss out on it completely. Ultimately, this story is about the way that people respond to the good news of Jesus, the way they respond to this opportunity for new life. And I don't believe that Jesus ever intended it to be an exhaustive list of all the things that could go wrong in your relationship with God. It's not an exhaustive list of all of the dangers and the pitfalls, but it does reveal to us some of the traps that we fall into, some of the things that could happen to us that would cause us to not flourish. And I think that one of the key takeaways here in this story is that not everyone who has an aha moment with God will have their life transformed by God. And for some people, the issue is that they don't make an effort to pursue the truth that was revealed to them in their aha moment. They have this big, oh my goodness, I think God is real. And he came to earth in human form as Jesus, and they begin to have this moment where like, oh, this changes everything, and then it changes nothing. Because they make no effort to pursue that truth that was revealed to them. But I think for more people than that, the reason that they fail to thrive, the reason they fail to grow in their relationship with Jesus is that they try to do it on their own. They try to be completely and totally independent, and they do life in Christ alone. And we weren't designed to be that way. Why? Why do we do life alone? I see at least 4 different types of people that end up doing life with Christ alone. And I don't share these 4 to make you feel ashamed, but just to maybe help you identify where you fit in this. And maybe you don't fit neatly into one of these categories, but you have a category of your own. The goal here is to ask the question, why do we do life alone? The first type of person are the people who are hesitant to enter into community because of negative past experiences. You know that you need community, and you're actually longing for it deeply, but you're really hesitant to enter in because you've had a bad experience. And maybe that was in church, maybe it wasn't in church, maybe it was in college or it was in high school. Maybe it's at work when you've tried to enter into social circles or into community at work and you didn't feel welcome, you felt rebuffed, you felt ridiculed, you felt mocked, whatever it might be. Maybe you joined a small group at a previous church or maybe at this church and you didn't feel as connected and loved the way that you wanted to be. And so you had a bad experience and you've said, I just can't do that to myself again. So you try to do life on your own. And the people that fall into this category, their struggle is often unknown and it's often very private. We struggle to thrive. We fail to grow the way that God is calling us to because we're trying to do it on our own, all on our own. And the second group are a little different. In fact, they're very different because they're the people who are enmeshed in communities that don't support or encourage faith development. We all know people like this. They have community, but the community that they surround themselves with, the community they spend the most time with, are communities that are working in some ways actively or passively against your spiritual growth. Now, don't hear me say that you should not spend time with people who aren't believers. I'm not saying that you shouldn't hang out with people that don't believe in God. You should, but that can't be your only community. You have to start from a solid base and move out from that solid base, and we're going to talk more about that next week. But some people are so enmeshed in their communities that they don't know how they could ever pull themselves out. So connected to a certain community that they don't know how to extricate themselves. And honestly, and in many cases, they don't want to. Because I've known these people my whole life, or I know that I've known that guy since I was 5, but I also know that guy, every time we hang out, we end up talking about things and doing things that I know I shouldn't do. I've known her since I was in high school, and I know that she shouldn't be my only person I spend time with. And I know that every time I get together with her, all we do is gossip, and it corrodes my soul. But she's my friend, and she should be your friend, but she can't be your only friend. And so we remove ourselves from Christian community because that is our primary community. And if you find yourself in that space, you also find yourself in a tug of war with your old way of life. You've had an aha moment. God has revealed himself to you, and yet you're struggling to thrive because you're in a tug of war with your old way of life between what was and what could be. The next group of people are the people who hold Christian community to an unattainable standard. People who say, well, this is the way it should be in the church. This is the way it should be in our small group. And there's the standard that has been set that every small group or every community of faith should be perfect. It should not have any scars or blemishes. People should always be kind and always merciful and always full of grace and always have a servant heart and always put others first. And that is true, but it's not attainable. It's not possible. That's part of the reason why part of our motto here at Life Church Livonia is real people, real God, real life. Real people, real God, real life. We realize that we are all flawed, broken human beings trying to do life together. And this group of people that hold Christian community to an unattainable standard can be a part of either of the first two groups as well. Maybe the reason they felt burned in the past was because they had an idealized version or vision of what it should be, and it didn't live up to that. Or maybe the reason they don't enter into Christian community is because they found community with their non-Christian friends in a way that they don't believe can be attained within a small group or some other group. And so what ends up happening in this place is that many people sit on the fringes of Christian community as critics of the community without ever entering into it. Like a sideline reporter at a really bad football game. Pointing out all the ways that they would throw the pass differently or run the defense differently. Do you have any people I'm a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. I grew up in Kansas. Today is a playoff day. It's a big day. If they lose, I don't want you to rib me about it next week, okay? Give me some love. Just give me a hug, all right? That's what I need. That's what Christian community looks like, people. But do you know any huge fans of sports that they watch TV at home, they've never played organized football, and yet they know more about play calling than the coach. And they're yelling at their TV and they're screaming at the coach, and they know you should have done an option, and you should have run right, or you should have run left, you should have passed, you should have done this, you should have gone for two. Constant critics of the game, right? We do this to Christian community. We sit on the sidelines and we point out all the flaws of the people that we are holding at arm's length. And part of that is because we've held the Christian community to an unsustainable and unattainable kind of system or standard. We sit on the sidelines as critics. And the problem is that there will never be a community perfect enough for you. Doesn't exist. The final group are people who unintentionally self-sabotage because of unexamined or unrepentant sin. We talk to people all the time that they say phrases like, I don't know why this always happens to me. Every time I do this, this happens. And some of that is not your fault. Some of that is just the brokenness of our world. But a close friend and mentor of mine would always say to me, Brian, everywhere you go, there you are. Everywhere you go, there you are. Some of us are doing life alone because there's brokenness inside of us, brokenness in the way that we interact with people that we've never examined thoroughly, that we've never dealt with deeply. And so we bring it with us to every single relationship we try to step into, and we unintentionally self-sabotage. As God meets you, wherever you're at right now, He wants to heal these things. He wants to heal all of these things. He wants to meet you in that spot where you've been unintentionally self-sabotaging you and reveal it to you in the way that only God can, in His beautiful, gentle way, and begin the process of removing that brokenness from your life, healing that brokenness in your life. He wants to meet you in that space where and bring you to your own aha moment that you are the constant critic of community without ever entering into it fully. And He wants to forgive you of that. He wants to go with you into your non-Christian community to meet your friends so that you wouldn't be transformed by your friends, but that your friends would be transformed by the God that is in you. He wants you to know that he sees your pain of the way that you were wounded by previous communities. And he wants to heal that so that it wouldn't prevent you from becoming fully who God is calling you to be. If you do life long enough within any community, you will at some point meet these people. And part of that is that you are these people. And most of us don't fit neatly into one of these categories. And my hope is that some of us don't fit into any of them because we're trying to do it and we've chosen to do it. But if you do community in any church for long enough, you'll meet these kind of people. And what I want you to know today is this, is that Christian community is messy, but it is worth it. The Christian community is messy, but it is worth it because it is in the mess where we find the most growth. It's in the mess that we learn grace. It's in the mess that we find forgiveness. It's in the mess that we finally see that life is real. And our God came to help us in that real life, not in our fake pretend life, in our real life, not in our Instagram story life, but in our wake up on Saturday morning and the dishes are still in the sink from the Thursday night life, right? I was going to say Friday, but that's not real life. Thursday night dishes are still in the sink, right? That's the community that God is calling us into. It's Christian community. It's messy, but it's worth it. It's in that mess that we see a reflection of our own brokenness and our own beauty. It's in that mess that we see Jesus working to redeem our friends and working to redeem us. There's a passage in the book of Genesis that gets used for weddings a lot. It's talked about when it comes to premarital counseling and when we're preaching about the creation story, but I think it really is applicable to our conversation today. It's in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, and I just want to read it to you. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." So I want to set the picture, paint the picture for you. God has created the heavens and the earth. He's made the plants and the animals. He's separated the water from the earth and created the first human to walk on that earth. And Adam, this first human, is placed in a garden that was literally designed to meet every single one of his physical needs. Everything he could ever have wanted or imagined was right there. Everything he needed to flourish as a human was in that garden, and God himself walked in that garden. Present. So he didn't need an aha moment, right? God was there. Everything was as it should be. He could eat what he wanted and sleep when he wanted, and his every need was taken care of, and God was present in that spot. And God looked at it and said, "It's very good. It's beautiful." All the things he had created were very good. But then there comes a moment in the story where we realize that something was missing. That something was missing from Adam's life, that for the very first time in all the story, instead of God looking at something and saying it's good, or looking at something and saying it's very good, this is the first time in the story where God says, no, that's not good. That's not good at all, actually. And God looks at Adam, this man who appeared to have everything he needed. A paid-off house in the suburbs. A pantry stocked with food. 2 cars in the garage that were clean and filled with gas, right? Kids that were well-behaved. Getting good grades at school. A job that satisfies. A relationship with God. Created and forged through an experience with Jesus. But 0 friends. 0 Christian community. God looks at it and says, it's not good. It's not good for people to be alone. This word here that is, we translate man, it's not good for man to be alone. It actually means humankind. It's not good for humans to be alone. This wasn't just a verse about husband and wife. It wasn't about just about sex or about marriage. It's about us. It's about life. It's about God looking at humankind and saying they won't flourish outside of community. It's about God looking at Adam and saying he's going to need people. Beyond the food and the breathtaking beauty and the satisfying work that God had given him to do, Adam had all those things in abundance, but what he needed was something else. Community. He had God there with him. And he said, it's not good for humankind to be alone. And what I want you to know is that this is the way God created us on purpose, to be social creatures. We cannot extricate ourselves from that need because it's built into our very DNA. You hear these stories about these children that grow up without touch or without human contact and the way that it literally changes their brain chemistry. You read stories about children, especially in orphanages and in certain countries where they lie in these cribs without any touch, and it literally messes with their biology in a way that is difficult to heal. You cannot extricate yourself from the need for community because it's built into your very DNA. It's true about you regardless of whether or not you've ever had an aha moment about Jesus. It's true for you regardless of whether or not this is the first time you've come to church or the 1,000th time you've come to church. I don't think that's possible. You have to be really old if it was the 1,000th time you've come to church. It's true about you. Someone's doing the math right now. I know you. I see you out there. What do we do? If it's true, what do we do? How can we choose community? It means that when you're having a really tough week, God is calling you to lean into community. It means that when you are disappointed by the church, God's calling you to lean into community. It means that when you have questions about God or questions about faith or questions about the Bible or you're struggling and wrestling with what you even believe, God is calling you to lean into community. It means when you stumble into sin or dive headfirst into sin, God is saying lean into community because Christian community is messy, but it is worth it. And friends, we try to sanitize our life before we step into community. And then when we do step into community, we feel isolated and alone from all the people around us because it doesn't seem as if they have tough weeks. It doesn't seem as if they are ever disappointed by the church. It doesn't seem as if they ever have questions about God. It doesn't seem as if they ever stumble into sin or dive into it head first. And so when we do step into community, we feel totally alone. And God says, step in those moments. You need each other in those moments, especially in those moments. If you jump back into the story about Adam and Eve and the very first humans in the garden, what happens the moment that they struggle? They isolate themselves. There's a moment in the story where there's sin that enters in, and the moment that sin enters in, they flee and hide. And God steps into the garden and says, "Where are you? Where are you?" Hiding, isolated, alone. God said it's not good for man to be alone, but the moment that they struggle, they get alone. Shame drives us there. Fear drives us there. Doubt drives us there. Worry drives us there. And it's in that place of isolation that we die. It's in that place of isolation where we fail to thrive. Even Jesus needed community. Even Jesus. And we see him, he definitely carved out time to be alone. It's important. We have to have time alone. But over and over again, he chose to immerse himself into life together. even as he was preparing to go to the cross. Even in the midst of talk about a tough week. You think your week was tough? I want you to imagine the week that Jesus had leading up to the cross and all the things that happened in that week. The struggles, the betrayals, the fear, the doubt, the worry. So many things happening. And in that space, in that week, he reached out to some of his closest people and he said, I don't want to be alone. It's not good for me to be alone. Mark chapter 14, it says, they went to a place called Gethsemane. And Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And then he took Peter, James, and John along with him. And he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. He said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He said to them, stay here and keep watch. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. I need you to sit with me. I need to be in community. It's not good to be alone. Now, if you know the story, you know that his friends struggled to live up to his expectations. If you know the story, you know that one of those friends ended up just a short time later denying that he even knew him. You know that one of the group from his closest community ends up betraying him that night. But if you know the story, you also know that he gave them grace. If you know the story, you know that after he had died and rose again from the dead, that he chose to step back into the same community that had failed him. The same community that had disappointed him. Hanging out with the same guys who fell asleep while he was shedding tears of blood. Because Christian community is messy, but it's worth it. He had invested in them, and he knew they weren't perfect. He didn't expect them to be perfect, but they were his. They were his. It isn't good when we are alone. And if the community that Jesus led was messy, you better believe that ours will be. If the little church that Jesus led was messy, you better believe ours will be too. Friends, we were built for community. Because community is where we flourish. Community is where we flesh out all of the things that God is drawing out of us and wants to pour into us. And honestly, I would confess that I haven't always been good at it. Community has been something that I've struggled with off and on my whole life. Of choosing to, sometimes feeling really awkward in it, right? Eventually I embrace that awkwardness. Anyone who embraces their awkwardness, I'm with you, right? Sometimes it's because I've held myself to an unattainable standard as a pastor and believed that I didn't need community or shouldn't need community the way others do. But it's really interesting because God has been growing that in me in a beautiful way. This past week was a really tough week for me. My wife has been out of town for a week on work. It's been really good for her. My daughter, who is 17, is in Colorado at a college experience. I'm not old enough to have a college-bound daughter. And in the middle of this week, we had it. My two sons and I at home, and we got it covered. But then in the middle of the week, we had something happen that was really just made the whole week kind of fall apart. Something that took an already packed, busy, difficult week and made it exponentially more difficult. And my initial thought was, how am I going to do this on my own? I honestly wasn't sure because it was tough. And I'm not going to share the full extent of that because it's not my story to share. But it was something that happened in my family that affected me deeply. And I had a decision to make in that moment. Would I isolate myself and do life alone? Or would I lean into community? Would I isolate myself and struggle alone? Or would I lean into community? And honestly, probably 18 months ago, I would have probably just suffered and struggled through it and made it and would have come here on a Sunday morning and pretended like everything was great in my week. But today, because of the growth that God has done in me, because of the community that we've chosen to step into, lean into over the last year, I had people I could call. I texted the lead team. They're awesome. And they engaged me and loved on me this week in a way that changed my experience of my week. They didn't do anything like huge or grand. I didn't sit down and have some deep counseling moment with someone. They didn't change every moment of my week, but simple phone calls, simple texts, simple offers of help in key moments when I needed it changed my whole experience. My neighbors, literal neighbors on either side of me in my neighborhood, heard about my difficult week from my son because he just tells everyone, right? Guess what happened this week? The one neighbor said that's the first thing that he said when he showed up at their door. He said, "Hey, how are you? Guess what happened today?" Real people, real life, real God. When you have kids, they just tell it, right? But they entered in, and they cared for us, and it transformed my experience of my week. All because I chose to lean into community. What would it look like for you to do the same? What would it look like for us to do the same? And what's keeping you from doing it? Final thing I want to say to you is this. If you're trying to do life alone, you're putting yourself at risk. You're putting your walk with God at risk. You're putting your children's walk with God at risk because you're teaching them, modeling for them that that's the way you do life. And some of us are sitting here longing for Christian community but unwilling to lean into it. We're waiting for other people to lean into us, waiting for someone else to make the first move. The people who have deep, beautiful Christian community are the people who lean into it together. Let's commit to this. Let's make this one of our New Year's resolutions as a church, that we would make the choice to lean in. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we worship you in this place. And many of us have had our aha moments, God, and we've come to a spot where we recognize that you are real. And some of us are flourishing in that space, flourishing our life with you, growing in our understanding of who you are and who you call us to be, but others are struggling deeply, God. And my prayer this morning is that you would meet the ones who are struggling right now where they're at. That if they're struggling because they've never come into a spot where they have given their life over to you, that they would do that right now, that they would simply pray and say, God, I'm ready to have a relationship with you. I'm ready for you to forgive me and make things new in me and set me on a new path, God. I'm ready to step into Christian community. If there are people here who have been wounded by community, I pray that you would heal that wound. If there are people here who have been critics of community, I pray that today during worship that they would confess that to you and that they would find forgiveness. If there's people here that are so enmeshed in broken non-Christian community that they don't see a way out, that you would give them a way out this week. God, I pray that for all of us, that we would have a relationship first with you, God, but that out of that space that we would find relationship with one another and that we would lean in. We choose community, God, over suffering alone. We choose it because that's the way you made us, and that's the way we will thrive. We love you. We commit our life and our relationships to you. In the name and the power of Jesus. Amen.